Your tax dollars buying opiates for ex-cons. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, there's an interesting program going on in the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, as it was officially denominated years and years ago. Governor Gina Raimondo got behind the expenditure of about $2 million a year in money in order to provide essentially drugs like methadone and other opium substitutes to addicts, not only when they come into prison, but when they go out of prison. Because apparently, no matter how long you've been off of opioids, you still want them. And so the idea is that they want to keep them from, not from being on drugs, they want to keep them from overdosing and dying. And let me just refer to some of the results from the early tests, because this program started in 2016. They began offering inmates 3 different medications: methadone, Suboxone, and Vivitrol. And Vivitrol is like an opioid blocker. To about 350 Rhode Island prisoners each month take one of these 3 medicines. And then after they're released, they continue to get dosed with these medications. And that's usually paid for, by the way, with Medicaid dollars. Here's what they say happened. The $2 million program has already saved lives. State officials say for the first half of 2016, 26 recently incarcerated people died from drug overdose in Rhode Island. In the same period in 2017, only 9 did. So now this is a story from Politico.com to give credit where credit is due. I found this story fascinating, gentlemen, on a couple of different fronts. First of all, Stephen Green, how do you feel about the idea of your state and in some cases federal tax dollars, because we're channeling money from Medicaid, going to pay to buy essentially opiates for opiate addicts?
Addiction is such a tricky issue, and I've got a personal angle on this I'll get to in a moment. I'm not opposed to this at all. I love our laboratories of democracy. I would love to see more experimentation in more states, and ideally what I'd like to see is for this stupid drug war to end, because we've had the FDA waging war now for about 2 decades on effective pain management, and the result has been a huge cause of our current opioid crisis. When people can't get relief legally, they will get it illegally. And of course, as stuff floods the streets, and somebody who can't get the crack cocaine they were looking for will take this stuff instead. And so the problem snowballs, it metastasizes and becomes worse and worse. And it's easy to judge addicts, and in some cases, we probably should. Although in the case of alcoholism, people who are actually biologically alcoholic, their liver processes alcohol differently from regular people, and they get a much more fun drunk than we do, and that's why it's so difficult for them to give it up, and it's why we've got programs like AA for them to try and cope with this. Drug addiction is a different matter, and drugs can just grab you. You know, they say meth not even once, and there's a lot of truth to that. And so we've got legal complications, we've got complications of biology, we have complications of character. To get into the personal aspect of this, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but because I never actually saw her use drugs, but for apparently about 2 years, my mom had a cocaine problem, an addiction, and she spent the last 25 years of her life clean and sober. However, she was not a happy person. Cleaning herself off of drugs and alcohol did not cure the underlying fault in her character. And I can't help but wonder if she might not have been happier had she lived 10 fewer years but had kept drinking the whole time. And this isn't out of bitterness or anything. This is just out of having witnessed this firsthand. And so I don't have a problem philosophically with trying out a program like this and see if we can at least engage in a little harm reduction. And if we get some of that, I don't mind my tax dollars going for that, particularly not at the local level.
So Steve brings up a good point, Bill, because the early results are actually pretty startling. And in that Politico article, one of the experts, health care experts, is quoted as saying that this is just sort of unheard of, that you'd have such a drop. It'd go from 26 drug overdoses down to 9 drug overdoses in the same 6-month period, 1 year to the next. Pretty, Correlation, absolutely. Causation, probably. Pretty well tied together. People are already suggesting, hey, well, we're using Medicaid dollars to pay for some of these medications after the prisoners leave incarceration. Why not roll this out on a national level and get the federal government to run this program? Because think of how many more people could be blessed by this, how many more lives could be saved, how many fewer overdoses we'd have. Bill, I would assume that you'd be on board with saving lives?
I'm on board with saving lives, but if I ever hear anybody say we should make this a federal issue, at that point I silently reach for the machete that I usually keep down the back. I just bandy it about. I've never had to use it, but usually drawing it gets people's attention. Something also I have a bit of a personal connection to. First of all, the reason that so many people overdose when they get out of the treatment centers is the doses that they were taking before they went in were so unbelievably high because they'd built up a tolerance to the opioids over the course of, in many cases, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. You need more and more and more to get high, and that's because your cells become saturated, and then when you become desaturated, you go back out and get the dose that you used to have, and it kills you.
Ugly.
So that's basically the mechanism. Methadone has been around for a long time. I was in high school on our senior year in debate. The subject was prison reform. There's a lot of talk about methadone maintenance, and that's the term that stuck with me. It's the term I'm going to use. Essentially, methadone is a very poor substitute for heroin to the degree that it relieves you of the opiate cravings, but it does not make you high. It is not a fun drug. It's not something that, wow, I'm going to go get some methadone. So to say that the government is buying, yeah, really, I'm a methadone junkie. To say that that the government is going to buy you drugs for drug addicts is certainly true, but I think really genuinely, in this case, a better way to say it is the government's going to be buying medication for these people. Now, for those people who say that this is a waste of money, I forget what the exact number is, but last I heard that a drug addict needs to steal something like $400 worth of personal goods a day in order to maintain a fundamental drug habit. They have to steal $400 worth of stuff, which they pawn for or cage for $40, $50. So there's some of that prevention going on, needless to say. But Steve talked about the main issue, and the main issue is this. Back in my mid-20s, I spent a year in Narcotics Anonymous. And the strange thing about me being in Narcotics Anonymous was I'd never done any narcotics, ever. I'd never had a drinking problem, and I never had a drug problem. So that made me rather unique among the Narcotics Anonymous crowd. But what I found, and the reason I went there on advice, was because I had a very addictive personality. And this is what you need to understand to get to the root of this problem. A lot of conservatives, rightly so, say that this is an individual responsibility issue, and they're correct in that. I've been on both sides of this fence. But what they don't understand is because they've never had to, because they don't have addictive personalities, they've never encountered something that is stronger than they are, that is stronger than their best intentions, stronger than their willpower, stronger than their biggest fears. I never did the drugs and alcohol because I was terrified of it. I thought once I start down that street, I'm never coming back. But with that said, it is a fallacy to assume that addicts are addicts because of a moral weakness, and if they would just toughen up and just say no, then they don't have to do the drugs. It's virtually impossible for people who were raised in loving families to understand what a tremendous hole and sense of anxiety is generated in children who weren't raised in particularly loving homes, and that is a crack in a person's personality, and it is something that is never fully fixed, but you can repair it. You can become functional. You just have to be taught how, and it takes a long time. Having been in NA for a year and having lived with addicts in an apartment and so on, I thought these were going to be just a bunch of, barely literate, stoners. I have to tell you, I've never met a more interesting and intelligent group of people than I did in Narcotics Anonymous in Miami in 1985.
They have great stories too.
Well, the great stories, and they're suffering, and they take the drugs because this was a fairly high bottom group of people. But in any event, what I discovered over time was that some people got better and some people didn't. And the difference between the two groups was some people wanted to get better and some people wanted to die. And I had two roommates, and one was of one kind and one was of the other kind. And that's the issue. And it's not an economic issue, although economics are related to it. Ultimately, the thing I would ask conservatives to try to understand is generally, if you're a conservative, generally speaking, you're conservative because you had a good relationship with your family. You had a good family. I think there's a fundamental psychological difference between conservatives and liberals. But if you were raised in any kind of a loving, normal home, I'm telling you that you are not capable of understanding the lack of well-being that exists in people. This fundamental lack of well-being that simply exists in people. You can't connect to it because you don't have it. And because you don't have it, you think it comes down to, well, just toughen up and work your way through it. It's not like that. It is bigger than them, which is why the first step in Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, all of these Anonymous, all of these Gambling Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, all of it is all different medications for the same fundamental psychological problem, which is this big burning hole in the middle of you, which you try to medicate with something that feels good for a time being. It's this is the core of the issue, and so to the degree that something like methadone can get somebody back out into the world and functioning, I think that's good. And I think that you're more likely to be essentially cured of your addiction, because I don't know anybody who loves methadone. I will say that I don't want to name the person, but somebody who is related to my family fairly closely had a serious heroin problem for most of her life. And at 26 years old or something like that, she was taking cold baths all day and couldn't stand it anymore. So after, I don't know how many weeks of trying to go cold turkey, she basically took my brother's pistol and shot herself through the thigh with a .45 caliber round, which stings a bit. And she did this because she wanted to go to the hospital to get some opium, to get some morphine type drug. That's not something that a rational person does, and that's not something you do for attention. That is something more powerful than you are, taking command of your body and telling you that this is the most important thing. And this is why you hear addicts stealing from their mothers, and why you hear them, cashing their children's college funds and feeling genuine remorse about it. Genuine remorse. Gamblers the same way. But it's simply more powerful than they are, which is why the first step in all of these 12-step programs is, I realized that I was powerless over my addiction. It is bigger than I am, and I can't beat it by myself. And anything that we can do to help people in that situation, especially if it's voluntary, I'm in big favor of. And that final thing, I'd just simply say this, is the personal connections. That's what saves people. Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, all that stuff works. But the thing that will save you or not save you is your sponsor and your relationship to somebody who's decided they want to live. That personal relationship becomes the foundation of sort of a parenting that you never had. And it's a beautiful thing. It's just an amazing thing. My life was saved by a guy named Kevin. I don't know his last name. I just know he was a big stockbroker in New York City and made millions of dollars. And by the time he became my sponsor, he was working at a gas station, a Gulf station on US 1 in Miami. I go visit him before I went to work, and I would sit there all completely hysterical about the latest thing and finally say, "Did you eat today? Because there's a Burger King across the street. I got $5 for you." "Yes, I ate." "You got a place to sleep tonight?" "Yep." "Then what's the problem?" And then you begin to get this sense that the world's not going to end, and it's more of that. So this is why we should not do it on the federal level, Scotty. Right? I mean, we should push it down as low as we possibly can.
Person to person.
Sorry about the oration there.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, there, according to this Politico article that had this story about the Rhode Island's program for opioid addicts, if I could say it, there are some 2.3 million Americans incarcerated right now, and an estimated 400,000 of them are addicted to something when they come in. It is a broad program that can be a broad problem that can be looked at a national level. However, I think that Bill and Steve are correct. I think there's a hazard in going at this program from the national level. I mean, one of the benefits of Rhode Island is the whole state's only 30 or 40 miles wide. And so it's a very small incubator for testing things, the equivalent in most places of a county. I mean, Rhode Island's the size of a decent-sized county. I mean, Texas has 254 Rhode Islands. So I think that there is an element of the personal at a small level like that. I mean, there are only 350 inmates involved in this program in Rhode Island in these first couple of years as they're testing it out. And I think there's a connection there, that personal contact that Bill talked about and the accountability that brings. I think there's a danger in going too soon national with something that shows promise, not only because it's likely to be mismanaged at the federal level, because it's just very difficult to roll anything out on such a massive scale, and you lose accountability, but also, as Steve Green pointed out during our backstage episode this week, that once it gets created like that, it'll never be destroyed. It'll never be taken down. It'll never be sunset, because it will become a self-justifying program. You certainly are not going to eliminate funding for the program designed to keep opioid addicts from killing themselves, are you? And so I think that this is a wonderful thing, and sometimes I wish there were no internet, and I wish there were no national media, and I wish there were no way for me to know what's going on in Rhode Island instantly. I want news to travel slowly about these things. I want Rhode Island to have a chance to test it out, and then like 6 months from now, I get a telegraph message that says, "Interesting program in prisons in Rhode Island. Stop." I want us all to step back and realize that while we can look demographically and statistically at problems on a massive scale, that problems are really personal. Problems are small. Problems are me. Problems are you. And we need personal attention. We need to address these problems at the smallest possible scale that we can do. So plaudits to Governor Gina Raimondo from Rhode Island for developing this program. Please, other state legislators and governors across the country, resist the temptation to call on your congressman to introduce a bill to create this thing at a national level. But, bite the bullet, find some money somewhere to make this happen at the county or state level, where you can demand some accountability and where the people who are suffering the most can get some personal attention. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.